Hello, welcome back for part 4 of this investigation of capitalist reproduction and crises within capitalism and whether these crises can be overcome. And in this part, we're actually going to get into looking at some potential responses to this problem that we identified last time, Gesundheit, where we saw that the capitalists' personal consumption fund is topping out here, and the capitalist at this point, from here on, no longer has the incentive to expand reproduction. So, is there a way we can remedy this situation? Well, from the capitalist standpoint, one way to remedy it would be to spend less on expanded reproduction. If expanded reproduction is eating into so much of the mass of surplus value, let's stop expanding reproduction so much. So one way we can do that is stop hiring more people, and in fact maybe even lay some people off. So here's a scenario I've done where the only variable we change from this base scenario is when we get to the onset of the crisis, okay, in year 138 here, where the capitalists the capitalist consumption fund would have started going down again. Here we have the capitalist take some proactive action against that. And what the capitalist does here is lays off a worker. So here we have the total population in this column of people who could work. These are people employed by the capitalists. And we have the capitalist lay off a worker. So now we have a very slight unemployment rate. And as a matter of fact, what this does is it does cut down on the variable capital that needs to be set aside for accumulation. It also cuts down to a certain extent on the constant capital, on the new machinery that needs to be accumulated as well, which means that leaves more money out of the surplus value, out of the mass of surplus value here, for the capitalist's personal consumption. So all seems well and good. But then the next year comes around, and to maintain this growth in personal consumption, even more people have to be laid off. And even more people the next year. And in fact, you can see it accelerates. Basically what I did here is I went through and I kept increasing the layoffs until I had at least minimal year-over-year growth in the capitalist's personal consumption fund. I tried to maximize the number of employed workers while at the same time making sure that there was never a year-over-year decline in the capitalist's personal consumption fund, because there's a decline in that. That means that the capitalist does not have an incentive to engage in that behavior. Capitalist only has an incentive to engage in decisions that lead to an increase in the personal consumption fund. All right. So what this necessitates over time is more and more people getting laid off, until finally by year 200 you have almost 63% of the population permanently unemployed. And these are not just temporarily unemployed. These are people who are unemployed without any prospect of obtaining work. It's not because they are lazy or they have any personal faults of their own. This is an objective necessity of the mathematics of this expanded reproduction. For the capitalist to keep increasing personal consumption fund, people must mathematically be laid off, even if they're all the nicest people in the world. It does not matter. The math doesn't care. And so this is one way of responding to the crisis, and it works sort of from the capitalist point of view. Growth resumes in the capitalist's personal consumption fund, but you get this huge unemployment, which would probably be intolerable for people. And plus, you've got this really does a number on the per capita output, per capita wealth, because you've got a lot of people not contributing to the wealth, not through any fault of their own, but because they're not being allowed to. So you get this per capita wealth peaking here and then you see the growth percent go negative, and per capita wealth starts decreasing. All right, so this is clearly not capitalism living up to its reason for being, its historical mission, so to speak, of developing the productive forces. So many people are getting laid off. Let's look at another way of addressing the crisis. In this scenario, the only variable we've changed is the wages of the workers. All right, so here, when the crisis hits, we start cutting the workers, instead of increasing the workers' real purchasing power by 1% each year, okay, which was giving the workers a stake in maintaining the capitalist system, because it was making life better for them each year, such that by year 130 something, their standard of living was 3.5 times better than before in terms of use values that they could buy. But starting at the time of the onset of the crisis, we have the capitalists start slashing wages by 5% per year. All right, and now we see the standard of living go down until here we have the standard of living no better than what the workers started out with at year 1. And still we have the capitalists slashing wages all the way to the point where eventually the wages by year 200 are like 16% of what the workers start out with. These are workers would probably starve by this point. This would not be enough to maintain them at subsistence level. This would be a horrible catastrophe in the economy. And even so, what's really interesting here is that does not save the capitalists' personal consumption fund. It delays the plateau. It delays the peak of the capitalist personal consumption fund. The consumption fund increases to a little bit more than it would have otherwise. It capped out around 130 without making these changes. But even slashing wages so drastically only buys a few more years of growth before it still starts declining. In fact, goes negative, you see. This is despite the fact that workers are still getting their wages slashed by 5% a year. And it gets so ridiculous that you can see, for example, this is the productivity of the machinery is increasing so much that really to support themselves at the subsistence level without any surplus value, the workers will only have to work like 0.4 hours per week. All right, out of instead of a 40-hour work week, they could work 1/100th that. All right, you see here they're getting paid even less. All right, they're getting paid, starts out here 20 hours a week. They're getting paid for paltry 1/10 of an hour each week, even though they're working 40 hours a week. And you see the rate of surplus value here is just skyrocketing into ridiculous percentages. All right, but that's still not saving the capitalists. It's not enough. The massive surplus value is not increasing fast enough to to allow for enough money to be set aside for new machinery and for the capitalist's personal consumption fund to increase at the same time. Still, too much money is going towards constant capital as the organic composition of capital increases. Next time, we'll look at some other remedies to possible remedies to this crisis, such as the idea of decreasing labor hours, which is a huge part of what Jehu of therealmovement.wordpress.com proposes as far as how the crisis of capitalism can be overcome. So we're going to look and see what effects that has on this reproduction table next time.